Welcome back to my solution for Challenge 7, Chapter 3, Fetch Joke. How was your walk in the park? A quick recap on the objective. We are going to need a getJoke async for wait function to await the provided API, fetch joke. We will display the setup, wait a few seconds and display the punchline. And we are going to use derive to count and display the number of vowels and consonants from the setup and then setup plus punchline. Let's look at the code. First, the API again. This exports function fetchJoke, which directly handles the API call and response. Now the main component. We import the fetchJoke function and the fly scale from svelte transition. We have some state for the setup, punchline, and booleans for loading and showing punchline, as we don't want that to be immediate. Note the timer variable timeout ID. I am not setting this to $state because it's not part of the reactive state that drives the UI. It's purely for clearing the timer. Next, we have the getJoke function. Since we are using a timer, we want to clear that if timeout ID is true or more accurately, truthy. So, if the fetch button is clicked again, it clears the timer. Initially timeout ID is falsy as it is undefined, but once set timeout is executed it returns an ID, could be number or string, making the variable truthy. There is one more part to the timer, which we will get to below in reactives. We set isLoading true and show punchline false and await the API function. This will display an error if it fails to fetch, otherwise it declares the setup and then we have a 3-second timer after which we declare punchline and set show punchline true and isLoading false. And of course, we will use these in the markup. Next, reactives. Since we are using a timer, we want to make sure we have a cleanup for that. As you saw just now, we do clear the timer if the fetch button is pressed again, but we need to cover the situation where the code exits. So, I'm using the $effect cleanup function. Remember this fires on component dismount or before the effect reruns. This will remove the timer when the component closes. Next, we want a reactive to show the number of vowels and consonants. This was just to get more hands on using derived. Did you use 2 reactives or 1? I did have 2 derived initially but I reduced it to 1. First, I set up joke text stripping out everything except letters using a regular expression. Next, declare vowels by matching AIOU in joke text. Then I return the count for vowels using length and the consonants are just the total length of the joke text less the length of the vowels. Using $derived means that the display will be updated immediately, so since our getJoke function has a 3-second delay between the setup and punchline, we will see an initial count for the setup and then that will update after 3 seconds to include the punchline. Lastly, in the script I'm using $inspect again to check the values in counts. In the console you will initially see an init showing the counts for vowels and consonants as 0. Next you will see 2 updates, one for the count when setup is first updated prior to 3 seconds delay, and then, after the 3-second delays when the counts are updated, this will show a second update in the console. That's the script done. In the markup we have the fetchJoke button with an onClick calling the getJoke function. Next, conditionally render loading. If you look really closely you might see the dots flashing. Next, the svelte transition fly in effect for the setup. After that another conditional, now for the punchline as we don't want that displayed initially, only when show punchline is set to true, after the 3-second delay. And last, we have a conditional render for the vowel consonant counts. Note, we are using the round brackets as $derived returns a function. And that's the markup. Hopefully, that makes sense. Of course, your solution could be quite different, and that is perfectly fine. I would love to see your version. There is an email link you can send it to. Now, in case you might be wondering why I have an async function in the main component calling the export function, which is another async component in the API, I want to mention separation of concerns. In some of the exercises and challenges so far, for simplicity, I have all the code in one component. This is not a good idea in general. You should separate concerns. Separation of concerns is a design principle where system components are divided into distinct sections, each handling a specific responsibility or functionality to improve maintainability and modularity. In this challenge, the fetch joke function API focuses solely on the API call and the response, which is good by itself dealing with one concern. The main code then is left to handle user interactions and UI updates. However, even the getJoke function in the main component would, in a bigger system, be in another file like a utility or API module, making it reusable, testable, and easier to maintain. That in turn keeps the main component focused on user interaction UI. Later, we will get into this aspect more. Okay, before we wrap this up, let's take a quick look at what was covered in this challenge. The key concepts covered were 1. Reactivity, utilize $state and $derived from SvelteKit 5 for managing and dynamically deriving state, such as counting vowels and consonants in the joke text. Use $effect to clean up timer. 2. Transitions, apply fly and scale transitions from Svelte's transition module to create smooth animations for the setup and punchline display. 3. Loading animation, use CSS to display a visual loading indicator while fetching jokes, enhancing user experience. 4. Separation of concerns, keep the API call fetchJoke encapsulated in its own logic, isolating data fetching from UI rendering for better maintainability and modularity. 5. Delayed execution, use set timeout to introduce a 3-second delay between the setup and punchline for comedic timing. 6. Error handling, provide feedback to users when fetching jokes fails, ensuring a robust and user-friendly experience. Okay, and finally that's a wrap on the Fetch Joke Challenge. I hope you enjoy the challenge more than the jokes. Please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions or requests. I will see you in the next video for the next challenge.